Hello there, my name is Patrick James, but you may call me PJ, and welcome to this video in which I am going to give you a tutorial on how to run every single character in the Trouble Brewing edition of Blood on the Clocktower. This is quite a long video. In fact, it is a lot longer than I had anticipated, but there is quite a lot to talk about all of these characters, so that's why it is this long. Before we begin, just to give you a little bit of context on what Trouble Brewing is, or what Blood on the Clocktower is, for those of you that have never heard of it. Blood on the Clocktower is a traitor-style board game. The way that I describe Blood on the Clocktower to others is essentially Town of Salem on steroids. It is very addictive, a lot of fun, always unpredictable, and every single person that I've introduced it to absolutely loves it, and that's not me like exaggerating. Everybody really genuinely enjoys this game. So today I'm going to show you how to run Trouble Brewing from the perspective of a storyteller. If you want actual advice on how to play any of the characters mentioned or how to bluff as them, there is a fantastic wiki website that is actually made by the people who created this game, which I'll leave in the description below. But if you do want me to make separate videos on these characters, I will absolutely do that. Trouble Brewing is the first of 3 current editions that are released, which is Trouble Brewing, Sex and Violence, and Bad Moon Rising. There are supposedly 4 more editions to be released. We just don't know when they're going to be released. We know what the names of them are, but we don't know what's going to be released when and which characters are going to be on them, even though there's quite a lot of characters that have been announced that are going to be in these editions, but I digress. Trouble Brewing is basically the beginner's guide, if you will. It is recommended for players and storytellers that are new to Blood on the Clocktower or social deception games. So if you are a new storyteller or if you're a new player, this is the edition to start with, and it is generally recommended that you play about 10 games of it. My personal thing is that if you've grasped the major concepts of it and if you're comfortable with it, then maybe try something a little bit different, but Sex and Violence and Bad Moon Rising does increase the complexity of the game, which I'll explain in future videos. But today I'm going to go through all of the characters in Trouble Brewing. There are 13 townsfolks, 4 outsiders, 4 minions, and 4 demons. If there is a specific character that you want to find out more information of, I've left chapters in the description below, so you can skip to the specific character you want to learn about. But that being said, let's just get started. You start knowing that one of 2 players is a particular townsfolk. So it's a very simple character to understand. Essentially, during the first night, the washerwoman is woken, shown 2 players, and learns the character of one of them. They learn this only once and then learn nothing more. And how to run it, again, is quite simple. While preparing the first night, you put the washerwoman's townsfolk reminder token, which looks like this, by any townsfolk character token. And then you put the washerwoman's wrong reminder token by any other character token. And then during the first night, you wake the washerwoman and point to the players marked townsfolk and wrong. Then you show the character token marked townsfolk to the washerwoman, and then you put the washerwoman to sleep and remove these when convenient. So in this particular example, we have decided to show the washerwoman, these 2 players, and the chef. So that means that the washerwoman knows that one of these 2 players is the chef. And you can do this with any 2 people that you want. There's no specific criteria. The only criteria is that the person that you show is a townsfolk, unless if the washerwoman is drunk. So you could show them the virgin, and you could put an evil player in that ping you want, if you want to. One other cool interaction to consider is in regards to the spy. So the spy can register as a townsfolk and can be in the washerwoman ping. So if you decide to register the spy as the townsfolk to the washerwoman's ping, you can basically show them as any townsfolk that you want. So it doesn't have to necessarily be one that's in play. It could be something like the monk or the soldier or the mayor or something like that. The librarian's ability reads, you start knowing that one of 2 players is a particular outsider or that 0 are in play. So it's quite similar to the Washerwoman. Like the Washerwoman, during the first night, the librarian learns that one of two players is a specific outsider, and they learn this only once and then learn nothing more. Now, one important thing to note is that there is an outsider in Trouble Brewing called the Drunk. So if the librarian learns that one of two players is the Drunk, they do not learn the townsfolk that the Drunk's player thinks they are. Now, how to run it, again, is very similar, if not pretty much the same as the Washerwoman. So while you're preparing for the first night, you put the librarian's outsider token, which looks like this, on the outsider that you wish to show, and then you just put the wrong outsider token, which looks like this, on any other character. And then when you go to wake up the librarian, you point to those two players that are marked outsider and wrong, and then you show the character icon that has the outsider reminder token on there. So in this example, we will show the librarian these two players and show them the saint character token. So that means that one of these two people is the saint. Then you put the librarian back to sleep and then remove these as and when convenient. So one important thing to note is that if this is a game where there are no outsiders, instead of pointing to two people, you just simply tell the librarian A0. But let's say, for example, and this is a cool interaction, that the librarian is drunk, then that basically means you can kind of show any two people and any character you want. So you could show them, for example, the person who's playing the Undertaker and the Slayer, and say that one of them is the drunk when really the librarian is the drunk. It's always a fun, sneaky interaction that some storytellers like to do. You start knowing that one of two players is a particular minion. So essentially, the investigator learns one minion character and two players which it might be. So during the first night, that is what they learn, and they learn this only once and then learn nothing more. How to run it, again, is exactly the same as the Washerwoman and a Librarian. You put the minion token, which looks like this, on the minion of your choice, and then you put the other minion token, the wrong one, which looks like this, on any player that you want. And then during the first night, you wake up the investigator, point to these two players, and then show the character icon that is indicated with the minion icon. So in this example, the investigator wakes up to learn that one of these two players is the poisoner. Again, you can do this with any combination you want. The only condition is that you have to put a minion in the ping, unless if, of course, the investigator is the drunk. The only other important interaction to point out, which is similar to the spy in regards to the Washerwoman, is in regards to the recluse. So the recluse's character, essentially, they can register as an outsider or evil, whether that is a minion or a demon at any point. So you can absolutely put them in an investigator ping. So if you do that, you can show the recluse as any minion. So you can show the recluse as a poisoner or a spy or whatever you feel is appropriate. You start knowing how many pairs of evil players they are. So it sounds a little bit more complicated than it actually is. So essentially, on the first night, the chef learns exactly how many pairs of evil players there are in total. So a pair is two players that are sitting next to each other. So these two are a pair, these two are a pair, these two are a pair, so on and so forth. And what the chef detects is essentially how many evil players are sitting next to each other. Now, how to run the chef is very straightforward. During the first night, you wake the chef up and you show the chef a finger number, 0, 1, 2, so on, equaling the number of pairs of neighboring evil players. And then you put the chef to sleep. So in this particular example, we have the imp and the Scarlet Woman sitting next to each other. So in that instance, so long as the chef is not drunk or poisoned, we show them a 1. However, in this example, and this is one of the more interesting interactions with the chef, is in regards to the recluse. So the chef number can increase or decrease if the recluse or the spy registers as good or evil. So because the recluse can register as an evil, just generic evil, then that means that we can show the chef either a 1 or a 2, depending on what we think is the most appropriate thing. However, let's say, for example, we had a spy instead. Because the spy does the opposite of the recluse in that it can register as good, we can then show the chef either a 0 if we decide not to ping the recluse's ability, or show them a 1, and that 1 being between the imp and the recluse. We can also still show them a 2 if we let all 3 of them ping as evil. Now, the last thing to consider is in regards to travelers. So the chef can detect evil travelers just like other character types, but only if those travelers join the game before the chef acts. So if the traveler, in this case is an evil scapegoat, joined in the game and was sitting next to, say, the imp, and they did that before the chef got their information, then the scapegoat evil traveler would count. Otherwise, it would not. So that is one other important thing to note. Each night, you learn how many of your 2 alive neighbors are evil. So that's quite straightforward. Essentially, the empath only learns how many of their neighbors are evil and not which one is evil. The empath does not detect dead players, so if the empath is sitting next to a dead player, they do not get information about that dead player. Instead, they get information about the closest alive player in that direction. And the empath acts after the demon, so if the demon kills one of the empath's alive neighbors, the empath does not learn about the now dead player. The empath's information is accurate at dawn and not at dusk. Now, how you run it is very simple. Each night you wake the empath, show them either a 0, 1, or 2 equaling to the number of evil players neighboring the empath, and then you put them to sleep. So for this example, the empath, as we can see, is currently sitting next to the monk and the soldier. Neither of them are evil, so in this case we would give them a 0. Now, let's say, for example, the soldier was killed by public execution, and then the monk died by the demon. Then the empath would learn about their next 2 neighboring alive players. So in this case, the evil gunslinger and the librarian. So in this case, we would now show the empath a 1. Again, if they are drunk or poisoned, you can basically show them any number you want for whatever you feel. And again, likewise with the recluse and the spy, you can ping their ability off and influence their number however you see fit. Each night, choose 2 players. You learn if either is a demon. There is a good player that registers as a demon to you. So each night the fortune teller chooses 2 players and learns if at least one of them is a demon. They do not learn which of them is a demon, just that one of them is, and if neither is a demon, they learn this instead. Now, how to run the fortune teller during the night. You wake the fortune teller. They point to 2 people. If either of those 2 is the demon, you nod your head yes. Otherwise, you shake your head no, and then you put them to sleep. So say, for example, they chose this player and this player. So neither of them are the demon, so you simply shake your head no, and then put them to sleep. If they were to choose, say, this player and this player, even though this player is evil, they are not the demon, so you would still give them a no. However, unfortunately for the fortune teller, one player called the red herring will register as a demon to the fortune teller if chosen. The red herring is the same player throughout the entire game, and this player may be any good player, even the fortune teller themselves, and the fortune teller does not know which player it is. So for example, if they chose, say, the empath and the person who's the butler, even though neither of them are evil, because the butler is this game's red herring, you would nod a yes to the fortune teller. The fortune teller can choose any two players, alive or dead, so if these two characters had died, then the fortune teller can easily choose this person and this person to get information from. That is absolutely possible. They can also choose themselves because they can absolutely be their own red herring. If they do choose a dead demon, however, they will still receive a yes because they are still the demon. Each night, you learn which character died by execution today. Now, the first thing to point out before I go into this character is that whenever you see the asterisk sign on a character, it essentially means not the first. So, for example, the Undertaker wakes up each night except the first to use their ability. So, as I've just explained, the Undertaker learns which character was executed the day before. So, the player must have died from execution for the Undertaker to learn who they are. Deaths during the day for any other reason, such as a gunslinger choosing and a player to kill, or an exile of a traveler, does not count. The Undertaker wakes each night except the first, as there would have been no executions at that point. If nobody died today, the Undertaker learns nothing. The storyteller will either not wake the Undertaker at night, or they wake them but do not show a token or anything. And if the drunk is executed, the Undertaker is shown the drunk character token and not the token of the townsfolk that the drunk player thinks that they are. Now, how you run it is very straightforward. An example, when a person dies by execution after putting a shroud on them, you then place the reminder token, die today, which looks like this, on them. And so long as the Undertaker hasn't been killed by the demon in the night, you wake up the Undertaker and you show them the character token, which is marked with die today. So in this case, the Undertaker learns that this person was the mayor. Again, as I've said, if the drunk dies, you do not show them the character that they think they are. You instead show them the drunk character token. So in this case, the Undertaker does not learn that this person is the virgin and learns that they are the drunk instead. And another last thing, again, as I've mentioned in previous videos in regards to the recluse and spy, if they die by execution, in this case the spy, you can show them as any townsfolk or outsider that you wish. So I could show them as the butler to the Undertaker if you want. As with the recluse, if they died by execution, I could show them the spy as an example, or something like that. Each night, choose a player, not yourself. They are safe from the demon tonight. So the monk protects other players from the demon. So each night except the first, the monk may choose to protect any player except themselves. If the demon attacks a player who has been protected by the monk, then that player does not die. The demon does not get to attack another player. There is just simply no deaths at night. And the monk does not protect against the demon nominating and executing someone. So how to run it is very simple. Each night except the first, you wake the monk. The monk points to any player except themselves. If the monk does point at themselves, then you just shake your head no and prompt them to point at somebody else. Then you put the monk to sleep, and then it puts the monk's safe reminder token, which looks like this, over the chosen player. If the demon then attacks a player who is marked safe, you just don't respond with anything, put them to sleep, and the player remains alive. So you don't mark them with a demon's dead reminder token or add a shroud as you normally would. And then at dawn, you declare that no one died in the night, but you do not say why. And then at dawn, you remove the safe reminder token as and when convenient. Now, there are some really cool interactions with the monk in this particular edition. When a monk chooses someone, that player is safe from the demon tonight, which includes preventing a demon from dying to their own ability. So We'll explain more about the imp when we get to them in its own separate video, but essentially one of the important abilities that the imp has is that they can kill themselves, and any living minion then becomes a new imp. So if the monk protects the player who is the imp, and then if the imp kills themselves, then they do not die and pass the imphood to somebody else. So a minion only becomes the imp if the imp kills themselves with their own ability, so essentially nothing would happen that night. And also in other editions, demons may have abilities other than killing, so the monk's protection also prevents other harmful effects of the demon's ability, such as poisoning or turning the protected player evil, so on and so forth. If you die at night, you are woken to choose a player. You learn their character. So very simple and very deadly. The Ravenkeeper is woken on the night that they die, and they choose a player immediately, and the Ravenkeeper may choose a dead player if they wish. Now, it is important for the Ravenkeeper that they die during the night. If they die during the day by public execution or by any other means, their ability does not trigger. If the Ravenkeeper dies during the night, you wake them up, they point to any player, and then you show the chosen player's character token to the Ravenkeeper and then put them to sleep. So, for example, if they died during the night, they choose this person. So we tell them that this player that they've chosen is the empath. Now, what is important is that we do discourage or even ban players talking about what they are doing at night as they are doing it. So when the Ravenkeeper dies, they can't get all excited and start talking about, oh, I'm going to choose this player. Everything has to be done pretty much in silence during the night phase. And again, like I've mentioned before in previous parts, in regards to the Recluse and the Spy, if the Ravenkeeper chooses either of those, you can show them the characters that they are, or you can show them as something else. So the Recluse, you can show them as any minion or demon character, and the Spy as any townsfolk or outsider. The first time you are nominated, if the nominator is a townsfolk, they are executed immediately. So this sounds a little bit more complicated than it actually is, but let me just quickly explain how that works. So, if a townsfolk nominates the Virgin, then that townsfolk is immediately executed. Because there can only be one execution per day, the nomination process immediately ends, even if a player was about to die. Only townsfolk are executed during the Virgin's ability, so if an outsider, minion, or demon nominates the Virgin, then nothing happens and the voting continues. The Virgin's ability is powerful because if a townsfolk nominates them and dies, then both characters are almost certainly townsfolk. And after being nominated for the first time, the Virgin loses their ability, even if the nominator did not die, and even if the Virgin was drunk or poisoned. So let's say, for example, during the nomination ceremony, the player who was the washerwoman says that they nominate the Virgin. Because nobody else has nominated the player who is the Virgin at this moment, you announce that the player who is the washerwoman is immediately executed and dies, and that you go to the night phase, and then afterwards you put the no ability reminder token, which looks like this, on the Virgin. Now, if an outsider, minion, or demon nominates the Virgin, so say for example, let's say the drunk chef nominates the Virgin, nothing happens, the chef is not executed and dies, the vote continues, but you still put the no ability token on the Virgin, which then means the Virgin's ability is now lost for the rest of the game. However, and this is one other cool interaction in regards to the Virgin, if the Spy nominates the player who is the Virgin, and this is the first time that the Virgin has been nominated, you can execute the Spy, they die immediately, and then the Virgin's ability is lost, and that is because, as has been mentioned previously, the Spy can register as a townsfolk. So you don't have to do this, it is not mandatory, but it is something worth considering doing, and the only reason you should do it is if you think there is a very good reason for doing that. Once per game, during the day, publicly choose a player. If they are the demon, they die. So, the Slayer can choose to use their ability at any time during the day and must declare to everyone when they're using it. If the Slayer chooses the demon dies immediately, otherwise nothing happens. The players do not learn the identity of the dead player. A Slayer that uses their ability while poisoned or drunk may not use it again. The Slayer will want to choose an alive player. Even if the Slayer chooses a dead imp, nothing happens because a dead player can't die again. And players may say whenever they want at any time. So a player who's pretending to be the Slayer may pretend to use the Slayer ability. So how to run it is extremely simple. So during the day, the Slayer can declare at any point that they wish to use their ability. If so, the Slayer will point to a player. And if that chosen player is the demon, you declare that the chosen player dies, and you put a shroud on their character token in your Grimoire. Now, if the chosen player is not an alive demon, say nothing happens. Either way, the Slayer loses their ability, puts the Slayer's no ability reminder token, which looks like this, by the Slayer token. So let's say, for example, that the Slayer uses their Slayer ability and shoots the Librarian. You just declare that nothing happens, put the no ability token on them, and then the game continues. Now, as I've mentioned before, and one of the important aspects of Blood on the Clocktower is that players may say whatever they want, whenever they want, at any time. So, somebody who isn't the Slayer can bluff and claim to be the Slayer and shoot somebody. If that is the case, go along with the bluff. Make people believe that this person who is claiming Slayer is actually the Slayer. So let's say that the person who's playing the empath claims Slayer and shoots this person. Even if this person was the demon, you still say nothing happens and the game continues as normal. Now, when the Slayer declares that they wish to use their ability, you can give the group a minute or two to discuss who the Slayer should choose, which can allow the group to feel responsible for the win or loss, but the Slayer is ultimately the one that makes the final choice. Now, a couple of interactions that is worth noting. Let's say that the Slayer does successfully choose the imp, but there is a Scarlet Woman in play and there are still 5 or more players alive. You declare that this player dies, put the shroud over them, and you say that the game continues, and that's because the Scarlet Woman has now become the new imp. So that's one interaction to consider. The last one is in regards to the Recluse. You could probably guess what this will be, but because the Recluse can register as a demon, if the Slayer claims the Slayer and shoots the Recluse, you can then decide if you want to register the Recluse as a demon, declare that they are dead, but that the game continues, and again the Slayer loses their ability. And as I've mentioned, if the Slayer is drunk or poisoned and uses their ability when they are under the influence of drunkenness or poisoning, then their shot is gone, even if they successfully choose the player who is the demon. You are safe from the demon. I'm pretty sure you do not need an explanation in regards to the soldier, but I'll give it to you anyways. So the soldier cannot die from the demon's abilities at all. So if the imp attacks a soldier at night, then nothing happens, nobody dies, the imp does not get to choose another player to attack instead. That, and also the soldier can still die by execution even if the nominator was the demon. The soldier is protected from the demon's ability to kill and not the actions of the demon player. And how you run it is very straightforward. During the night, if the demon attacks a soldier, the soldier remains alive, and then at dawn you just declare that no one died at night. In other editions, the demon may have abilities other than killing, so the soldier is also protected from all other harmful effects of the demon's ability, such as poisoning or turning the soldier evil or anything like that. The only thing to consider is that if, for example, there was a poisoner in the game and the poisoner poisons the player who is the soldier, if the imp then attacks the player who is the soldier, then the soldier's ability malfunctions and they do die at night. This would also be the case if the soldier was actually the drunk as well. If only 3 players live, and no execution occurs, your team wins. If you die at night, another player might die instead. So, a couple of things to pick out with the mayor. Firstly, to survive, the mayor sometimes accidentally gets someone else killed. So if the mayor is attacked and would die, the storyteller may choose that a different player dies instead. Nobody learns how they die at night, they just learn that they died. If there are just 3 players alive at the end of the day and no execution occurs that day, then the game ends and good wins. And if the demon attacks the mayor and the storyteller instead chooses a dead player, the soldier, or a player protected by the monk, then the player does not die. So just a quick example, during the night, if the mayor would die, you choose if the mayor actually lives or if the mayor remains alive and another character dies instead. So let's say, for example, that on this particular night, we'll say this person died by execution. And then let's say the imp decides to kill the player who is the mayor. You can decide if either the mayor dies or ping it off of anybody else. So if you ping it off of, say, the saint, then you would put the shroud over the saint and put the demon's dead token on them instead. And then the very last thing is, if we are in the final 3 and no execution occurs, then the game ends and the good team wins. If an execution does occur and a good player dies, then obviously the evil team win. And of course, as always, if the mayor is drunk or poisoned, then the ability, if only 3 players live and no execution occurs, your team wins, does not activate and evil would win. Or if during the night, if the mayor was drunk or poisoned and the demon chooses to kill them, then the mayor can die. Each night, choose a player, not yourself. Tomorrow, you may only vote if they are voting too. Now that seems very convoluted, but let me explain. So each night, the butler chooses a player to be their master. This may be the same player as last night or a different one, so it's completely optional. Now, if the master has their hand raised to vote, or if the master's vote has already been counted, the butler may raise their hand to vote. If the master has their hand down, signaling that they are not voting, or if the master lowers their hand before their vote is tallied, the butler must lower their hand too. Now, it is not the storyteller's responsibility to monitor the butler. They're responsible for their own voting, and deliberately voting when they shouldn't is considered cheating. Because exiles are never affected by abilities, the butler can vote freely for an exile of a traveller. Dead players may only raise their hand to vote if they have a vote token, so if the butler chooses a dead player as their master, this will still apply. The butler is never forced to vote, and the butler's vote may be tallied by the storyteller before or after their master's seating position, because seating position is not important. Now again, running the butler is actually quite straightforward. So during the night, you wake the butler, they point to a player. So let's say, for example, they pointed to the player who is investigator. You then put the master reminder token, which looks like this, on that player. So this now means that during nominations and during the voting phase, whenever the player who has the master token is voting, the butler can raise their hand. If the player who is the butler's master does not have their hand raised, then the butler cannot have their hand raised. Obviously, the butler doesn't have to have their hand raised if their master's hand is raised, but they are not allowed to vote if their master's hand is not up. Now, sometimes mistakes can happen, so the butler can accidentally raise their hand when their master isn't. In that situation, while it is unfortunate, in most cases, it's just better to let the vote be counted and just privately remind them later that they must follow the restrictions of their ability, because publicly altering the vote tally would confirm that player as the butler, which would be excellent for the good team and not a great outcome for game balance. So if this happens, just tally the vote and just have a word with the player who is the butler to remind them that they have to vote in accordance with their ability. The butler can still nominate freely, so they don't have to nominate someone because of their master. They can just nominate anybody they want. They're just restricted by voting. And of course, when they die, their ability no longer functions, so they can just vote whenever they want. But like everybody else, they only get one ghost vote, which once they've used, it is gone for the rest of the game. You do not know you are the drunk. You think you are a townsfolk character, but you are not. So I've already talked about this quite a bit during the course of this video, but now I can talk about this a little bit more kind of in greater detail. So essentially, during setup, the drunk's token does not go in the bag, or you do not select it if you're playing it online. Instead, you add an extra townsfolk character into the bag, and the player who draws that token is secretly the drunk for the whole game. The storyteller will know who that person is, and the player does not. Now, the drunk has no ability. Whenever their townsfolk ability would affect the game in some way, it doesn't. However, the storyteller pretends that the player is the townsfolk that they think they are. So if that character would wake at night, the drunk wakes to act as if they are that townsfolk. And if the townsfolk would gain information, the storyteller may give them false information instead, and the storyteller is encouraged to do so. So, how you run it, as I've just said, while you're setting up the game, before you put the character tokens, or while you're selecting them if you're playing online, instead of putting in the drunk character token, you just add in an extra townsfolk. Let's say, for example, we do this setup. We have decided beforehand that the player who is the Ravenkeeper is going to be the drunk. So when you pass out the characters, whoever has the Raven character token, you just put the is the drunk reminder token, which looks like this, on that player. So if the drunk player is a player that acts during the day, like for example the Slayer, you still go through the motions that you normally would with the Slayer. Let them take their shot. Whoever they shoot, even if they choose the person who is actually the demon, you just say that nothing happens and the game continues. If the drunk thinks they are a character that wakes at night to gain information, you still go through the motions. If the player who is the fortune teller is actually the drunk, you still wake up the fortune teller, you still do the fortune teller things and give them false information. Remember, the important thing is that the player doesn't know that they are the drunk. You can give drunk townsfolk true information, but it is encouraged that you more so give them false information, and it is up to the player and or the other players to figure out if the person is just a drunk or if their information is legitimate. You might register as evil and as a minion or demon even if dead. So I've already talked about this extensively, the same way that I've talked about the drunk and the spy in previous chapters, but I will just go through this in a bit more detail. So whenever the recluse's alignment is detected, we as the storyteller can choose whether the recluse registers as good or evil. So whenever the recluse is targeted by an ability that affects specific minions or demons, the storyteller chooses whether the recluse registers as that specific minion or demon. Now, the recluse may register as either good or evil, or as an outsider minion or demon at different parts of the same night. So the storyteller chooses whatever is most interesting. So for example, let's say that the investigator may learn on the first night that either the recluse or undertaker is the baron, but then if the recluse died by execution, and if the undertaker hasn't died by the demon ability, so if the undertaker would learn what the recluse's character is, we could show them as the recluse, or we could show them the Scarlet Woman instead. So it doesn't have to be the same minion, it could be a completely different minion, or it could be the demon themselves. It is completely up to storyteller discretion. But what's important to note is that a recluse that registers as a particular minion or demon does not have this character's ability. So for example, a recluse that registers as a Scarlet Woman does not become the demon if the demon dies through public execution or if they kill themselves during the night. And as I've mentioned before in how you run it, it is basically any time that a character interacts with that character, you just decide if whether or not good or evil. So if the empath was sitting next to the recluse, we could ping them as evil. If the Slayer shoots the recluse, we could choose to register them as the demon and kill them due to the Slayer ability, so on and so forth. If you die by execution, your team loses. So this one, like the soldier, is probably one of the more straightforward characters to explain, but essentially, if during nominations, if the saint is killed by public execution and dies, the game immediately ends and the good team loses and the evil team win. If the saint dies in any other way other than an execution, such as the demon killing them during the night, or if the gunslinger's ability chooses a player who is the saint, then the saint's ability does not trigger, nothing happens, and the game continues. Now, an important thing to note is that in the saint's ability, it has the strange phase, your team loses. Now, in Trouble Brewing, this will always mean that evil wins, because the saint is always good. However, in other editions, it is possible for characters to change alignments, so that would mean that if the saint was evil and is executed, then that means that evil would lose and good would win. Each night, choose a player. They are poisoned tonight and tomorrow day. So I've talked about this quite a bit because poisoning is one of the core mechanics in Blood on the Clocktower, but essentially each night the poisoner chooses someone to poison for that night and the entire next day. A poison player has no ability, but the storyteller will still pretend that they do. They do not affect the game in any real way. However, to keep up the illusion that the poison player is not poisoned, the storyteller will still wake people at the appropriate time and go through the motions as if they were not poisoned. If the ability gives them information, then we would give them false information. Now, if a poison player uses a once per game ability while poisoned, they cannot use their ability again. So how you run it, and a couple of examples, is very straightforward. You wake up the poisoner, they pick a player, and that person is poisoned, and you mark that with the poisoned reminder token, which looks like this. So for example, if they poison the investigator, instead of showing them the actual person who is poisoned, you can show any two random players, good players, evil players, whatever you want, and say that one of them is the poisoner instead. If they poisoned the empath, instead of giving an empath a 1, which they usually would, you instead give them any other number that isn't a 1. So in this case, you could give them a 0 instead. If they poisoned the Slayer, and if the Slayer claims that they are the Slayer and shoots the player who is the imp, the ability does not go through. You put the no ability reminder token on them, and the Slayer has lost their shot for the rest of the game, and so on and so forth with other characters. Each night, you see the Grim War. You might register as good, and as a townsfolk or outsider, even if dead. So this is basically the opposite of the Recluse, but with a little more spice. So essentially, if any character has an ability that would detect or affect a good player, then the spy might register as good to that character. If any character has an ability that detects townsfolk or outsiders, then the spy might register as a specific townsfolk or outsider to that player. It is the storyteller's choice, of course, as to what the spy registers as, even as many characters or both alignments during the same night. And of course, like with the Recluse, the spy does not gain that townsfolk or outsider's ability. So each night, how you run it is that you wake up the spy and you show them the grimoire, which is basically this circle that you can see of all of the players' characters and the respective reminder tokens. So they will look at the grimoire for as long as they need to. They'll usually nod their head when they fully understand, and then you put them to sleep. And when running the spy, each time that a character interacts with them, you basically decide if whether or not you want to register them as the spy or as a good player, townsfolk, or outsider. So for example, if you decide to register them as the townsfolk to the washerwoman, you can put them in the washerwoman ping and show the spy as any townsfolk that you want. So we could say the monk, for example. Or if you woke up the chef, you can show them either a 1 because the imp is sitting next to the recluse and the recluse can register as evil, or you can show them a 2 and register all 3 of them as evil, or in this case, you can even show them as a 0 because you could decide not to register the recluse as evil to either one of these two. It is completely up to storyteller discretion. There are extra outsiders in play, plus 2 outsiders. So this basically is a setup change mechanic. So this change happens during setup and it does not revert if the Baron dies. A change in character during setup, regardless of what happens during the game, is shown on character sheets and tokens in square brackets at the end of a character's description. And the added outsiders always replace townsfolk and no other character type. So during setup, if you decide to have a Baron as one of the minions. In a 10-player game, there's usually 7 townsfolk and 0 outsiders, so what you do is you modify that to now having 2 outsiders and 5 townsfolk. And as I've said, once the Baron dies, whether that is through execution or death of the night, their ability still functions because this is something that happens during setup, so you do not go back to what the count was originally. Basically, everybody is stuck with what you have. If there are 5 or more players alive and the demon dies, you become the demon. Travelers don't count. So, the Scarlet Woman, in a more simpler way to put it, is essentially a safety net for the evil team. So, if there are 5 or more players just before the demon dies, that is 4 or more players left alive after the demon dies, then the Scarlet Woman immediately becomes a demon and the game continues as if nothing happens. Travelers do not count as players when seeing if the Scarlet Woman's ability triggers. If less than 5 players are alive when the demon is executed, then the game ends and good wins. If 5 or more players are alive when the imp kills themselves at night, then the Scarlet Woman must become the new imp. And if the Scarlet Woman becomes a demon, they are the demon in every way. So good win if they are executed, they attack each night, and they register as a demon. So how to run it is very simple. If, say for example, in an 8-player game, the demon is executed and dies, you then mark the Scarlet Woman with the is the demon reminder token, which looks like this. And now this means that the Scarlet Woman is the new imp. You can change them with the actual imp token if you so choose. However, let's say there are less than 5 people remaining and the demon dies. The Scarlet Woman's ability has already ceased to function, so that means the game would immediately end and good would win at that point. Each night, choose a player, they die. If you kill yourself this way, a minion becomes the imp. So, in Trouble Brewing, there is only 1 demon in the entire game. In other editions, there are usually 4 demons to choose from, but because Trouble Brewing is a beginner script, they decide to only have 1 demon on there just to make things easier for people to learn. The imp is the classic demon. On each night except the first, they choose a player to kill, and because most characters act after the demon, the player will probably not get to use their ability tonight. So one thing you have to remember is that when a character dies, the death happens instantaneously, and that means their ability no longer works. So if the imp kills the empath does not wake up to learn how many of their living neighbors are evil. if the imp kills the virgin, then that means their ability no longer functions, so on and so forth. The imp, because they're a demon, knows which players are their minions, and they know 3 not in play good characters that they can safely bluff as. So a bluff, for those of you that don't know, are 3 characters that are not in play, usually good players, that the demon and their minions can safely bluff as, so that they don't get into any double claims or anything like that. And this is not just for the imp, most demons do get these bluffs. There are certain demons and certain characters that do not get bluffs, but we'll get to them when we cross that bridge. Now, if the imp dies, the game ends and good wins. However, if the imp kills themselves at night, they die and a live minion becomes the imp. This new imp does not act the same night, but is now the imp in every other way, in that they kill each night and lose if they die. So how to run is simple. Each night except the first, you wake the imp points at the player and puts them to sleep. So let's say, for example, that they wake up and choose the player who is the Undertaker. You put a shroud on them, put the dead token, which looks like this, and that player is now dead. Now, what's important to note is that if the demon does kill themselves and an alive living minion becomes a new imp, they become the imp instantaneously, and any ability that they had previously ceases to exist. So when a character changes character, they do not retain the ability of the character they were before. So let's say that the imp kills themselves in the night, and then the poisoner now becomes the new demon. Whoever they chose previously with their ability no longer works. So in this case, the fortune teller is no longer poisoned. Now, the imp can attack a dead player at night. That is absolutely possible, and whenever a character's ability says choose a player, that means that any player, alive or dead, can be chosen. And that is pretty much it on every single character that is in Trouble Brewing in Blood on the Clocktower. This has been a very long video, and I do apologize, but there is one last thing that I did want to mention before I end this video, and that is the night order phase. So contrary to what a lot of people do not know when they first play Blood on the Clocktower, is that there is actually a specific order in which you have to play these characters. Now, it's not exactly something that every single player needs to know, but it is important for the storyteller to play these characters in this specific order because of game mechanics and how they function. So firstly, there is the first night. So this is the order that you do it on the very first night of the game. You firstly do the minion info and the demon info. That's essentially minions finding out who other minions are and who the demon is, and the demon info knowing who their other minions are and also what 3 characters are not in play. Then it goes Poisoner, Washerwoman, Librarian, Investigator, Chef, Empath, Fortune Teller, Butler, then Spy, and then you wake everybody up. And then for the other nights of the rest of the game, so this is from night 2 onwards, it goes Poisoner, Monk, Scarlet Woman, Imp, Ravenkeeper, Empath, Fortune Teller, Undertaker, Butler, then Spy. And apart from that, that is very much it. I hope that you enjoyed this video and found it helpful. If you have any questions about any of the characters or about the game, etc., then do leave them down in the comments and I will make sure to respond to them as soon as I can. But that is going to end today's video. So thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you next time. Bye bye.